Welcome everyone to our first ever Developer Circles Scale Connection webinar. We are super excited to bring Dan Abramov to you today. My name is Chimde Adeke. I'm a programs manager at Facebook. And here with me is Dan. Thank you for joining, Dan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, let's get going. Our audience today are members of the Facebook Developer Circles, a community-led program designed to create physical and online forums led by local developer influencers to collaborate, to share knowledge, and learn about Facebook developer products and technologies. Could you please start by letting us know about your responsibilities at Facebook, Dan?
Yeah, sure. So again, my name is Dan. I work on the React team at Facebook. So I work full-time on helping maintain and develop React. React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces that we use in a lot of places at Facebook. So my day-to-day job is just fixing bugs, helping develop new features, helping integrate it. I don't know, talking to people about React a little bit. That's most of what I do.
Awesome. I'm sure developers in the room would like to know how you got your job at Facebook. Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, sure. So I've been at Facebook for about four years. I think I started in at the end of 2015. So before that, I was working at a small startup, and we were building a web app, and we started using React because the user interface was pretty complex, and so we needed a library that helps us like develop a kind of like complex UI like this. And we looked at options, and we liked React, and we ended up rewriting the whole app with it. But that was 2015, so that was before React. That was just as React was becoming popular. I think we actually started using it maybe in 2014. So that was before there was a whole ecosystem of like components and libraries and stuff. And so at the time, you couldn't really find, like, if you needed the router or you needed like, yeah, you can just find something on NPM like that. That was just the beginning of the ecosystem. And so I ended up, like, whenever we needed something for our product, for like built with React, there was like no existing solution. I would have to build something myself. So I ended up building a bunch of those libraries, and I think at some point I got contacted by a recruiter from Facebook who saw some of this work. But that was a US-based recruiter. But I couldn't get a US visa because I don't have either. I think you have to have either like a degree, or you have to have certain like level of years of experience. So I didn't have that, and which is kind of sad. Yeah, well, I don't know, maybe next time. And so we haven't chatted with that recruiter since that time. But later, I was at my first conference. I was giving a talk in Paris about some of the stuff that I built with React and like on top of React. And I met Jing Chen there. She's an engineer who's been working on React and related technologies at Facebook. And we've chatted before on like IRCs because I was asking her questions about how some of the stuff works. So she recognized me, and we talked at the conference. And it just so happened that there were like maybe like 4 or 5 people from Facebook who happened to be at that conference because it was like a React related conference. And so Jean mentioned that actually we have a London office, and she asked if I tried applying to that. But I said I didn't even know that the London office existed, so obviously I didn't. And so they actually organized an interview right at the conference venue, like in the hotel the next day. It was our regular interview process. So it was, just to be clear, there's different kinds of interviews at Facebook. So the one I went through was the front end pipeline. So it depends on the role. Like there is a software engineer interview, and then there is a front-end engineer interview that are completely different. And I wouldn't pass the software engineer one because it's just super algorithmic. I don't really know this stuff. But so I went through the front-end engineer pipeline. And yeah, so they did the interviews, just a regular interview process, like 4 people or 5 maybe interviewing. And I did get an offer, and then I guess like 6 months later, like I relocated because I was living in Russia, so I had to move to London. But that was a good thing, and yeah, now I'm here. So that's roughly how it happened.
Thanks for sharing. I think some aspiring developers think that people that they look up to just get into some companies without even going through interviews. But it's good to hear that you also went through a process, which is good for their motivation.
It's the same for everyone. Yeah.
Awesome. So Dan has randomly picked 15 questions that you all submitted. It's incredible that you submitted over 100 questions, but he's been able to pick 15. And he also accommodated a few live questions towards the end of this webinar. So we'll move over to the questions that you submitted earlier on. So the first question: at what point, Dan, do you believe someone should be referred to as a senior engineer?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think like I'm not a so there is a school of thought that titles don't matter as much, and it's like sometimes like they just reflect how long someone has been at the company, and doesn't actually mean that like this person is I don't know, more capable than someone who's like relatively new. So it's it is I think it is hard to agree on a definition. So like it means different things at different companies. Like at Facebook, I don't think we even use titles much. So like technically you can, I think you can like edit your title. I don't know if people do that. I know some people edited their titles and then they had visa issues because the governments were confused by why the title doesn't match what they do. Anyway, getting back to the question, so what does it mean to be like senior? I think so. Again, I'm describing just in Facebook terms because I haven't kind of worked at a big company before, so I don't know how it works at other companies. We use a kind of a leveling system. It's not exactly the same as like senior versus junior. Like we don't call anyone that, but technically it's like a engineering ladder. So you get hired at a certain level, which is determined based on your past experience and what kind of work you do. And with each level, there are some expectations. So for example, maybe you start at a level where the expectation is that maybe you can work on a feature in isolation, you can get a feature done, you can like fix a bug, you can do some engineering work. That's kind of the baseline that we expect all engineers to be able to do. But then it's expected that you would grow at least to like a, sorry?
Seems we lost Dan.
Oh, thought I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello?
Dan, do continue because we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. I'm confused because it seems like Jim D is saying something, but I don't hear him. Anyway, what I was saying is, the baseline is that you can work on a feature or on a bug or something like this, but then we expect you to progress to a level to where you can own a certain subsystem. So you know a part of your product or a part of the library or the thing you're working on really well. You have expert knowledge in some area of the code base that you work in. And again, this is like a level where we expect you to get after a certain time. But I think this is still not quite what I would consider like senior. So I think the next step is okay, you can work on code, but just working on code is not enough, because you need to like the hardest problems are often not in code, but in coordinating with people. So for example, maybe two different teams are building similar things, but they don't agree with each other on something, and that creates a tension, and that that makes progress harder. Or maybe there's maybe there's another person who disagrees with something that somebody on your team is doing, and that also creates friction in the organization. And I think a senior engineer is someone who is able to resolve those problems. So it's not just about writing code, it's more about figuring out ways to make sure that we're building something that actually needs to be built, to make sure that it's not being built into some dead end, that like some approach that doesn't make sense in the long run, to align different teams together and help inspire people, give them like a vision that makes technical sense. I think that is what a senior engineer does. And of course, mentoring, interviewing people, kind of helping grow the next generation of people who do the same things.
Yeah, thanks for answering that. I think one thing I picked from this is that it actually depends on the context, and also depends on the part someone is on as well, and even the company.
Yeah.
To the next question, do you ever experience imposter syndrome? If yes, how do you handle this? I'm sure this is a question that most engineers ask every other day.
Yeah, I guess it also depends on like how do you define imposter syndrome. But if it's I mean, like I think there are several layers to this, right? So one layer is do you like genuinely feel that, hey, like I can't do this, I'm not smart enough, or well, like you just have like those doubts, and then you're not sure if they're actually valid or not. And I think this is something I maybe used to have more in the beginning. So maybe like a few years ago, or like a bit more. But I think what comes with just with time is you just get used to feeling like this, and then you figure things out, and they kind of work out. And I think it depends on the person. What I can say, like for me personally, I feel like I still have the feeling, but I don't really pay attention to it as much. So I think I always do feel, hey, like I'm surrounded by people who are smarter than me in something, who are better than me in like how they work, what they do, that I'm struggling to like understand them, or like figure out the solution where somebody figures out it like quite easily. But I've also just gotten used to it. So it's like, yeah, that's fine. But I can do like there are things that I know I'm good at that are harder for other people. And it's just the more time you have, the more kind of context you gain around both your skills, like what you need to work on, and also just things that you like or don't like doing. And sometimes it turns out that you like doing things that other people don't like to do, so you can fill in on their weak parts. So I think overall it's just the feeling doesn't go away, but it also doesn't really, like it doesn't meaningfully change anything. It doesn't like affect me negatively.
Yeah, thanks for that. Next question, what concepts or topics are a must for a React developer?
Yeah, I think if I understand this question correctly, it's like, what are the things I need to learn to say that I'm proficient at React, or something like this. I would say it's just the main topics you can find there in our documentation. So I think like the core ideas are, have a tree of components. Each component decides what should be on the screen. You pass props down to specify like what data or what state, like what should be displayed at this time. And you have state, which is things that change over time, that is like owned by each component. I think just understanding that is like 80%. And the idea that for each piece of state you want to decide where it lives. So like what is the component or like the thing that owns it, so that you don't you don't have disagreements between them. So understanding that the data kind of flows down, and you just decide where the source of truth for each piece of data is. And then once you understand that, it's like all the other things like hooks, effects. Those are kind of side things that relate to that context, I guess. But it's really about understanding this idea of a tree. I think if you understand that, and if you kind of played with it, if you work with it a little bit, if you like, we have a tutorial. If you go to reactjs.org, choose tutorial tab, we have a tutorial that walks you through building a tic-tac-toe game. Some people say, oh, like, I don't build tic-tac-toes, why I don't build games, why does it matter? But it actually shows all of these concepts in one place, and it's a really good tutorial. Sophie Albert wrote it. I think if you understand those things, then you can say that you understand React.
Next question. What does it take to be part of the team working on React.js and Redux?
Yeah, so I should clarify that we're not working on Redux. So Redux was my personal project together with co-authored by Andrew Clark. We both happen to be on the React team now, but that's tangential. Neither of us is working on Redux, and we haven't like touched Redux for like 3 years probably. So Redux is completely maintained by open source volunteer maintainers. We don't take part in that. So I can't say what it takes to work on Redux, although I guess for people who are working on it now, what it took is just like messaging me, hey, like, I want to maintain this thing that you're not maintaining anymore. That's often what it takes. For like what it takes to be a part of working on it on a team working on React, I don't really know. Like, I don't think there's anything specific that like it takes. It's just that like if you look, we have a team page on the website. I keep plugging the website, but there's a lot of good stuff there. If you go to community section and then choose team, there's actually like a team page with faces and small bios of people who are on the team, and you'll probably find that there isn't really a lot of similarities. Like most of us don't have computer science degrees. We have a person who has like majored in psychology. A bunch of us haven't majored in anything at all. I dropped out of the uni. So some people tend to, I think like one thing in common is that usually it's people who used React for a long time, who kind of know the pain points, maybe did some work in open source, and who are really interested in built-in libraries, which is a little different from using libraries. And some people on the team are internally, so they worked on something else at Facebook, and then they switched to React. That is pretty common. I think that's actually more common for most like infrastructure teams at Facebook, is that you work on the product first, and you understand how to build things on Facebook, how to build product code, and then you kind of see patterns, and you see like people making the same mistakes over and over and again, and you kind of want to think, okay, can I fix that in the library? But it is really important to stay in touch with like how products are built and how this library actually gets used. Otherwise, you lose all sense of like what's important and what's not. So I think we do prefer when people come into the team with strong kind of product background, but who are also maybe experimented with open source and libraries. We're not like actively hiring right now, but I think just I don't know, being good. It's a hard question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, there's no one way. Next one. So this person says, if a developer has never looked at Redux, would you recommend to just pick up Redux hooks for state management, and why?
Muted.
Yeah. Yeah. So Redux questions are kind of hard, but I get that like people keep asking them, so I'm kind of I have to answer them. But it's like it's a bit awkward because like I used to work in Redux, now I don't work in Redux anymore, and like some of the ideas there I think they were good, and some of the ideas there I think they were not good. And it's but then people ask, oh, but should I do this? And I'm like, I don't know how to answer this because you need to think for yourself and kind of pick the things that make sense to you. I think like overall, if we like, I would say that if you don't have any specific problem that you think is going to be solved by Redux, then you don't need to learn it. So like I would just start with just learning React and using that, and then when you bump into a problem, if there is a plain React solution to that problem, you might want to explore that first. So for example, like a lot of people used Redux because the context API was broken in React before like the current one. So people just use it as a, not because they actually needed anything related to Redux, they just used it as a workaround because they just needed to pass some data down the tree. And like, that's what context API is for. But then you might, the other question is just, what is your app's architecture? So sometimes you have no architecture at all because like maybe you haven't thought about it, or you just like copied whatever you saw somewhere else. And I think sometimes that might lead to problems where maybe you don't even use Redux, but you use like in the React, it's really important to consider where you're putting your state, right? So like if you're typing into a field, that should be that field or like its parent components state. It shouldn't be the state of your whole app. That doesn't really make sense because it doesn't scale, because you if you put every text field into something like Redux, or even if you just use context API and put like all the state on top of your application, then every single change has to start at the top. And that's not very efficient because people will keep adding more and more things to the tree. And so even if it's fast enough today, gradually as your app becomes more complex, you will like each of those existing interactions will have to pay the cost for like everything that's below. And sure, you can hack your way around that. You can use like minimization and all of this stuff, but you just don't have that problem in the first place if you put your state close to where it's used instead of hoisting it way up to the top of the tree, which is sort of what Redux does, and also sort of what, like if you just use context yourself and don't critically think about where the state should live, I understand it's tempting, oh, let's just put everything at the top. But I don't think that's such a good idea. And for things, sometimes state does need to be shared between a lot of components. But in most cases, we've actually found that those use cases are kind of more about caching. So it's not really state, it's more about cache of something that you fetched. So it's a slightly different case because it doesn't need to update as often. It just updates when the network fetches something. So it can kind of leave to the side, and that's okay. And so at Facebook, we use Relay for that sort of caching. So Relay is a GraphQL client with a cache. In open source, Relay is not very popular, although I would say maybe you should give it a try, especially with the new hooks APIs. There's a Relay hooks release that's been released recently. So that is nice for things that you fetch over time, and that doesn't really change on the client. It's just like a cache. And in open source, there are things like Apollo, which do something similar, maybe sometimes less efficient, but it does the job. So I would say think critically about why. If you use Redux, think critically about why, what exactly you're putting there, and make sure that you're putting things there for a reason and not just because you haven't thought about a more natural place for them to live in.
Amazing. Next question. What does the future look like for a React developer for React developer workflow tooling? What does the future look like for React developer workflow tooling?
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna bring my magic ball and just gaze for a really long time, and maybe I'll be able to define you something. I can tell you the future. I can tell you some of the things that we've been working on. So one is one that I'm personally excited about, although it's probably old news to like all of the people watching this, but so the thing that really got me excited about React in 2015, which is like 5 years ago, was this ability, like because it is declarative, you can edit code and you can replace component dynamically, like in a running application without stuff breaking, which is like what we called hot reloading at the time. So that was my kind of a pipe dream. Like when I just prototyped this, I thought, well, nobody's ever going to use it. People won't believe that it works. It's just too complicated to set up. And 5 years later, we've just built that into React. So like it took me a while to like I wanted to work on it from the beginning, but I couldn't really figure out how to do it in a way that is reliable. And I think a lot of people got bad experiences because it was unreliable. But after Sebastian came up with hooks, things kind of clicked. So I understood how to do it in a reliable way. And so we shipped it on React Native first. In React Native 61 release, we call it Faster Fresh. I specifically picked a different name than hot reloading because people have had bad experiences with hot reloading. And I just want to emphasize that, hey, like this thing works completely differently. It's actually pretty reliable. It can recover from errors. You don't have to like manually refresh all the time. You don't have to worry that, oh, I don't think it worked. Let me try just refreshing in case. So it's actually pretty reliable. So just like I think, and we're currently integrating Faster Fresh into Create React App and Next.js and Gatsby. So it's going into like into web open source solutions as well. So I think that is just exciting to me because I think that's part of how like the developer workflow should look like. Yeah, you should be able to edit your component, see the changes reflected on the screen immediately. No need to like refresh the browser or like open whatever part of the app you were in again and just like repeat the steps. Just like work on it as a live app. I think that's just going to be a kind of a new standard for how that works. I guess other things that I'm excited about, but like we're not actually working on are, I think it's really interesting to look at each component in isolation. So I think in there are already tools that like Storybook that kind of let you do this, but they're not like fully automated. But I think it just makes so much sense that you should be able to open any file with a component and just see that component. So you should, like, it doesn't make sense that you have to launch your app to see a component. Like you should just be able to see it side by side in your editor. And if you edit a button, you should see that button. If you edit a like a dialogue, you should see that dialogue. So I think one thing that is preventing this is that a lot of the kind of app setup logic is imperative. So, oh, but you have to hook up your Redux store. Now you have problems. But as you move, like as we move into making more things declarative, so like Relay is an example of that. You write GraphQL queries, you don't care how Relay executes them, you just write them, and then Relay figures out how to hook them together to your like to fetch the data and display it. But that's just one example. But I think overall, we're moving into that direction where I hope it will be possible to just like preview each component as you work on it. That's kind of my dream. And another thing that's related to developer tooling that we are currently working on, which is again a very early prototype stage, but so there is this notion of so in other libraries that are not React, there's often a notion of single file components, right? So there's this idea that maybe you should put like styles and like in Vue has single file components where you put styles and markup and logic in the same file, and you don't have to have separate files, which is if we think about React, well, React has been kind of that way from the beginning, because you technically can declare like all of those things in the same file. And I mean, it depends on the solution you use, but some CSS and JS solution extract static CSS perfectly fine. So it's not, there is no performance problems or anything. You just, that's also how we developed the new Facebook website. We have like one file per component. All the like styles are there. They're extracted into CSS automatically. But if we take this idea further, which I don't think like any, like I haven't seen any library try this yet. Why is backend and front end separate? So this is kind of a weird question, and I know like a lot of people are going to be angry about this, but there is, I would say there is some artificial separation between, hey, here's a component that, so when you want to fetch some data, what do you write? You write a component, you have a thing that like kicks off a fetch, you have an API layer, you have like backend, here's where your API comes in, and then you have like you talk to the database or use your or object relational mapper or some helpers. You get those things, and so it's like a lot of lumping, and GraphQL partially solves that, but a lot of people don't want to use GraphQL, which is fine. Like it doesn't work for all use cases. But what if we could have something similar to GraphQL in spirit, but that's not specific to GraphQL, where you write your component and the same file, I'm just going to talk to the database, or like I'm just going to like talk to a few like microservices or whatever you have on the backend. But like that part is, even though it's in the same file, that part is the backend. It's like the backend of your component. And what if we had a system that lets you compose those components? So like each component has its like server part where it specifies how to get the data, and then the framework is able to kind of compose those things together. So if you go to a new screen, has a bunch of components with data requirements, it runs those things on the server, gets the data, and hands it to your components, and you don't have to do any of that plumbing. Like that we think that would be pretty awesome for some use cases. So that's kind of what we're focused on now. But I think in like if we're successful and if that works out, I think like in 5 years, the separation between the backend and front end will not disappear, but become a lot more fuzzy than it is now. And similarly, it should be way easier to move some code from server to the client and from client to the server. So currently when people think about React, they think, oh, React is this client-side library. But no, you can server render with React. But server rendering is just the first load. So then the client takes over. But then you have to download all of that code to the client to be able to do like navigations and like to click on things. But what if we could, for things that don't need to be instant, because like for navigations, you need to fetch data anyway. So you have to talk to the server. So what if we could partially render some things on the server and never send that code to the client at all? Because it's just not necessary on the client. We can just execute that on the server. So I think what we'll see is a lot more hybrid approaches where it's not client rendering, it's not server rendering, it's kind of like a hybrid rendering when so some code executes on the client, some code is server only, some code can execute on both, and it's really just optimized for whatever is best for each use case, and you can freely switch around those techniques. I think that's something that I hope to see.
Wow, amazing. Rich context and insights so far, Dan. We still have loads of questions. I hope that we'll get through them, or even if not, I think we've been enjoying it so far. So the next question is, with React Context API in place, is it necessary for a developer to learn Redux? I see Redux is everywhere.
Yeah, I think I already kind of partially answered that, but I will just reiterate that. First of all, the word necessary and Redux should not go together, because at least if we're talking about React, it has never been necessary to learn Redux. I guess like, yeah, the job market, whatever, sure, like maybe it is necessary in that sense, but from React's point of view, there is nothing in Redux that is necessary, and Redux is not a part of React, and it is not something that is like necessary to use with it. That said, there are some good ideas in Redux, and we've put them into React. So there is so one good idea in Redux is that, okay, like let's describe the way things react to state updates as a pure function that takes the current state and what happened and returns the next state, and that you can Redux takes this idea kind of to the limit by doing this for the whole application, which is similar to what Elm does, which Redux is partly inspired by. In React, we don't think it's a good idea to do like for the whole app at once. But we do like to use this for particular components. So in React, since hooks, you can express, you can use reducer hook. So that hook lets you use something similar to Redux reducer to drive a component's local state, which I think is great. It's a great feature. And similarly, again, like context is technically saying with context API in place, it's like Redux, this is what Redux uses. So Redux uses context. It's not like the other way around. So those are not exactly alternatives because context is the lower level mechanism that like Redux relies on. Specifically the Redux React bindings. Anyway, what I mean to say is that it's not necessary. You may still have to learn it because somebody at the job you're trying to land is using Redux, and then you have to roll with it. I think some of the ideas like reducers are pretty good, but they apply outside of context of Redux too. So they're good to learn because they're useful for vanilla React and just for general education. Like it's a good idea to understand how reducers work. But I wouldn't say that you have to learn to structure your apps in a Redux specific way. And also there is no Redux specific way because Redux doesn't actually have any opinions on how to structure things, which is also why people struggle with it, because it's like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't really give you any recommendations, or at least not the like the default feature set. I think there are some recommendations now with the Redux starter toolkit, but I haven't been involved with that, so I don't know how it works.
Awesome. Next question is, what problem is the React team trying to solve with Suspense and render, and with Suspense and render and UFetch paradigm?
Okay, I think this is referring to render as UFetch. Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of a it's an interesting question. So for those of you who don't know, Suspense is just a way to specify declaratively how your app, like how your components look while the screen is loading. So like maybe you go to like from feed to profile, and so we need to kind of start loading, show some spinner, and then show your maybe username and avatar, but then the posts are loading, so maybe we show some glimmer there. And then, so it's like, it's a way to structure your loading states intentionally and specify them declaratively. So you don't write code like if is loading, return spinner, otherwise return this. And instead you just wrap things in a special Suspense component and say, hey, like this is the part that while it loads, I want to show like this kind of loading indicator. So we released Suspense in like 2018, the initial version that only works for code splitting. So it only is useful for when you don't have some code ready, you're fetching it, and then that the thing is displayed. But the longer term game is we want to use Suspense for any asynchronous loading operation. So like you're loading data or you're loading code or like something else, but you can specify it in one place. You can say, I want to show this loading indicator while anything below is loading. And so that's what you use Suspense for. And so that part is not quite ready. We do use it in production at Facebook. So we use it together with relay hooks. So relay already integrates with Suspense in experimental releases. That's what we use in prod. It's not quite in a place where it's ready to be released in open source. And so here's why. So initially, when we demoed Suspense in 2018, when we thought that, oh, we're going to release this in half a year, which is not what happened. It's still work in progress. the reason that happened was because we thought, well, today the way fetching works for a lot of React apps, the way they do data fetching is they fetch in component lifecycles or like in user fact hooks, which is functionally equivalent, which means that a component has to render first, it has to get on the screen, and then when it gets on the screen, it's like, oh no, I don't have the data, so I'm just gonna like use effect or component mount, I'm just gonna start some fetching. And so, and this kind of works. And so that's what we used in our gem of Suspense as well. It's like, it's slightly different. It doesn't use life cycles, but it effectively, like it starts rendering and then it encounters, oh, I'm not ready, I don't have the data, so I'm gonna kick off a fetch to fetch the data. And so this kind of works. But we think we have a responsibility that if we're gonna introduce something like some new API for people to do data fetching, that we say, hey, this is the way to do data fetching in React, it is really important that this way scales very well. So it has to be not just at the same level that today's apps are, but it needs to be at the level where apps will need to be in like 3 years or like 5 years. It needs to take the long-term outlook. And so our concern was that we already learned at Facebook with Relay that this way of data fetching does not scale at all. So what happens is that if you have a parent component that fetches something, then you have a child component inside of it that also fetches something. Now what happens is that your page renders. It's like, oh, I don't have the data, I'm gonna fetch something. So it fetches some code, fetches some data. Okay, this stuff comes back, it renders child component. And then the child is like, oh, but I also need some code and some data. So it kicks off a fetch, that comes back, and then finally you have the thing. And so what I have there is waterfall, because it starts, it does something, but it only does the first request, then the first request comes back, and only then we start the second request. So this is terrible for performance. It's okay if you have like 2 of those components, but as you scale your website, as you add more of those things, everything becomes super slow. And the problem is that there is no one easy fix. You have to literally re-architect your whole app to remove those, like maybe you need to change the router, you need to change how you do data fetching. So it's a lot of work, and so that's how people are getting stuck with slow apps, which is ironic because a lot of people are like, oh, like they're looking at these framework benchmarks, comparing how many millions of operations per second some library can like mutate the DOM, but they're missing that they have 3 seconds of waiting for network and then 3 seconds of waiting for network, because they're waiting for the first call to finish to even start the second one. And like that's a huge performance problem that they're completely missing because they're not looking for it. So the point is that we knew this is unsustainable, and we already had a solution, which is like the Relay team has figured out how to fix it, which is you declare components together with their data dependencies, so that you, in the code, it's still convenient. You see the data together with the component that needs it, but in practice, it isn't loaded in this staggered fashion where we have to finish one thing before we can start the other. Instead, there is a compiler that extracts these data dependencies out of the whole tree. And then what happens is that if we go to a profile page, we know, oh, it's the profile page. Well, what data does it need? Well, the compiler has already figured out the whole tree. So we can kick off the fetch both for the data and for the code that might be needed for that data in parallel. So everything happens in parallel. We don't need to have this staggered waterfall loading sequence. We can start fetching as early as possible. In fact, we can start fetching before the component even renders. So we can start fetching the moment you click the link, or even hover over a link if we're certain that there's a high probability you will click it, we can kick off the fetch. And so this is way better. This has resulted in multi-second performance improvements on the Facebook website, and we would just feel completely responsible if we did not take this lesson and instead release something that encourages worse patterns for years to come. So what we've done instead is we completely stopped this thing in the tracks, and we went back to the drawing board together with the Relay team. And so this is the motivation for like the work we're doing right now is we're working on a generic way to collocate your like data fetching functions together with React components, but then have a compile step that extracts them and puts them on the server so that they can all execute in parallel. And so that just like with GraphQL, when you fetch the data, you just hit one endpoint. You don't hit like 5 endpoints at the same time because that's very inefficient. You hit one endpoint, and that gives you back all the data the new screen will need. And so this is kind of what we're working on now. Is we're calling that React blocks, like Lego blocks, because you can put them together. So blocks are kind of like these components with data dependencies. And so we have a compiler step that will put the data fetching functions on the server behind a single endpoint automatically. And then you declare data dependencies with components, but React will actually talk to the server, get all this data together that's loaded without waterfalls, and then give it back to you. So this is the problem that we're trying to solve with this render as you fetch paradigm, is that we don't want these waterfalls. We want to load data as early as, and code as early as possible, as soon as we know that you're gonna need it. And so this is also why it's taken us so long to actually like ship Suspense for data fetching, because we could ship the version we had in 2018 like today, but that would be bad because we don't think that it's setting a good example. So we're taking the time to do it right.
Wow, amazing. So we'll take one more question, then we'll quickly go to the live chat and pick one question, and then we wrap it up because of our time. So someone asked, why did you stop your JavaScript series?
Oh yeah, so I did not actually stop it. So to give some context on that, so I have a thing that is like not a Facebook project, not related to React. It's just like my own personal time thing. It's called Just JavaScript. So I'm gonna plug it here. It's justjavascript.com. It's still free for now. So I'm developing. This is a series of lessons on JavaScript. It has nothing to do with React. It doesn't teach React, but it teaches the basics that I saw people working with React frequently. Like maybe they learned React first and they didn't really like dive into JavaScript before, or maybe they didn't find any accessible resources, so it was kind of hard for them. And I totally feel that. Like I used to feel the same way, where I was just writing some JavaScript, I didn't really understand how it works, and I just felt like I don't know what I'm doing. And so this is what this series is designed to address. So this is a collaboration with Maggie Appleton, who is an illustrator. You might have seen her illustrations for like Egghead courses. She also gave an amazing talk at Women of React conference. It's womenofreact.com. There's a YouTube recording, and Maggie's talk is somewhere in the middle. It is amazing. So she's a great illustrator and visual communicator. And so it's a collaboration where we take different concepts from JavaScript from the ground up. So it doesn't exactly teach you JavaScript, like it assumes that you kind of know JavaScript, but it gives you a mental model that works. So it fixes all the things in your brain where you're confused about how things work, and it puts them in the right place by giving you visual metaphors that show how things are actually wired up. And when an expert looks at the code, this is sort of what happens in their head, like not exactly visually, but it's sort of the mental wiring that happens as they read the code. And so this is what we want to give to you, is that being able to look at the code through kind of experts' eyes by learning these like this relationship between things. And so it's a series I've been writing, like we've been thinking about it for like, I've been thinking about it for like 3 years, and we've been talking about it with Maggie for like a year. And then we actually started writing those drafts. And for now, this is an email newsletter because we just wanted to get something out. We didn't want to build a website, just wanted to give, like, to get early feedback from people. So for now, it's completely free, although that's probably not for a super long time. But anyway, so when you get subscribed, you get each lesson one by one, like every day. but obviously only to the point that they're actually like written. So the last one has been really hard to write. Like usually, previously it would take me like 2 weeks or so to finish a lesson, and the last one has taken a month. It was about mutation. So a lot of people thought that I unsubscribed them or that I stopped working on it, but it's just that I hit a bit of a writer's block, and I like wrote it a few and rewrote it a few times. So, and it's just, it has some very complex animations that like Maggie had to learn a whole new like tool, animation tool to pull them off. So the truth is just, it took a very long time to make, but we're sending the first letters like today for this lesson, and the rest of them probably throughout this week. So you get, if you sign up, you'll get them. Just javascript.com.
Yeah, thanks for actually sharing this. I think it's also, I feel it's encouraging because people think that experts don't hit writer's block or don't have challenges. So it's good. I'm sure it will inspire someone out there that yes, it's okay. It's okay to hit writer's block or have challenges. So to the live chat, and this will be our last question for the day. So Garba asked, what does front-end developers do at big tech companies like Facebook? Do they build new projects or they work on already made codes?
So, so the question is, what do developers at Facebook? Can you say the question again?
What does front-end developers do at big tech companies like Facebook? Do they write or help build new products, or they just work on existing codes?
Yeah, it really depends on the team, right? So when like a big company is one of the, I guess it depends on like how the company is structured. So at Facebook, you usually join the bootcamp, which means that the first few weeks you just you can just pick random tasks throughout the company. So you can like work on some Oculus stuff or like some Instagram stuff or something like something Messenger or Facebook. So you just work on whatever as long as this is something that makes sense. And so this way you kind of learn about different parts of this like technology stack that we use. And I think like at the end of like 6 weeks or so, you need to pick a team. So supposedly, since you've already worked with some different tasks and some different people, you already talk like to a few managers, a few people from different teams. So maybe you have an idea for like what you're interested in, and it also depends on which teams are currently looking for somebody to join those teams. So yeah, and like there are teams that work on existing products. There are teams that work in new products. There are sometimes like a company might reprioritize something, and then like a team that was busy with one thing might work on another thing. So like as an example, now with the like a lot of engineers who were working on the new Facebook website, they have temporarily switched to help with the COVID initiatives. So there is a new like coronavirus hub where there's like latest health information, and also features like you can tag yourself as like needing help or being able to send help. And so I know like a lot of people switched to working on that. A lot of people switched to work on the messenger rooms, the new video presence call feature. So sometimes in times of crisis, things can switch around. But it's also because like people really care about those things and think that this is more urgent than whatever they have been working on. But overall, I think at least at Facebook, it's really up to the team selection, like which team do you pick and why. And some of them work on infrastructure, so that means like us, right? So we work on things that are used by new products, used by old products. Some people work in design systems, which are also like, here's a button, it's used everywhere. Good luck maintaining it. So it really depends on which team you join.
Wow, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for joining us today. This has really been amazing and insightful, even for me that doesn't like code today. But thank you so much as well to our amazing participants from across the world for joining us too. We know it's a difficult time right now due to the COVID-19 climate, but we immensely appreciate you for this time that you spent with us. And we do hope you enjoy the time and also join us in future series. And I want to close by saying that we want your feedback. Please take a minute to complete the quick survey that will be shown at your screen right after the webinar session and also via email. Thank you once again. Please stay safe and see you next time on Developer Circle's Skills Connection.